Minister, I've been wondering who was this budget designed for? So when the Minister for Finance and the Minister for Public Expenditure sat down and thought about the people that they wanted to help, who did they think of? You'd imagine it would be the young people who are locked out of buying their own home and can't even afford to rent, the more than 500,000 adults in their 20s, 30s and 40s living in their childhood bedrooms who feel a sense of panic because their lives are passing them by, the young couples who are postponing having a family because they can't afford to live together. I've looked through the document hoping to find any indication that the government is finally going to try a new approach for housing, that it's going to target resources where we really need them, the delivery of affordable homes. But there's nothing. Zero. No new capital for the biggest social catastrophe of a generation. Is it an oversight or finally a kind of acknowledgement of failure? Has the government given up on delivering affordable housing and instead just blatantly introduced a budget with more support for landlords than tenants or first-time buyers? It is just incredible that there is twice as much funding in the budget for landlords than the tenants who are paying them record rents. It's a clear demonstration of where your priorities lie. This isn't a budget for renters or first-time buyers, so who was it for? Unfortunately, it's not a budget for struggling families either. The Children's Minister did follow through with his commitment to reduce childcare fees by 50%, and I welcome that. But the savings won't be introduced for another year. This is a budget that could have gone so much further for families. Where was the vision, the ambition? The Social Democrats in our alternative budget proposed a radical reform, 500 million of capital funding to begin investment into a public model of childcare. The state needs to shift its perspective on early childhood education and care, viewing it as a public good rather than a private commodity. We also budgeted for the extension of parents' leave for the first 12 months of a baby's life. This would mean an additional 12 weeks of paid leave split between parents. Not only that, we would increase the rate of maternity, paternity, parents and adoptive benefit from €262 per week to €350 per week. This is a measure that would make a huge difference to parents who often struggle financially when a new baby is born, especially when their employer doesn't top up their maternity or paternity benefit, and we know many don't, about 45%. New parents should be entirely focused on enjoying time with their babies, not worrying about bills. Your budget increased parents' benefit by just 2 weeks, but we know that was an increase required by an EU directive. So the increase is just the bare minimum that was legally required, another missed opportunity. This budget is also certainly not designed for low and middle income workers. In fact, the higher income earners who disproportionately benefit from tax measures. Let me give an example. The government obsessed about the USC cuts for months in advance of this budget. And in fact, the Social Democrats were criticised for saying we wouldn't cut the USC. So after all that talk, what did this 0.5% USC cut amount to? It meant a cut of €10 per year for low-paid workers on 25,000, and a cut of 235 for those on 70,000, a figure 23 times higher. After all those column inches about tax cuts, not least those written by Fine Gael junior ministers, that is all of what that fuss was about. The Social Democrats believe there should be a tax package in the budget, but that it needs to be fair. And crucially, it should not pull valuable resources away from investing in public services, which make a real, meaningful difference to people's cost of living and their quality of life. So we'd increase tax credits by €225 each, a saving of €450 for every worker, no matter what you earn, and increase tax bands in line with wage inflation. Because we recognise that those at the very top don't need further tax savings, we would also introduce a third 43% rate of tax on incomes over 100,000. More than 90% of workers would be better off under our tax plan, and the benefits, crucially, would be shared much more equally. What has this budget achieved for the most vulnerable in society? We know those on fixed incomes, on pensions, one-parent families, disabled people are finding it especially difficult to get by. Price increases have been relentless, and there is no end in sight. The cost of goods and services in Ireland is now nearly 50% higher than the EU average. We know an increasing number of pensioners are afraid to turn on the heating because of their sky-high energy bills. That parents are choosing between feeding their families and heating their homes, and more disabled people are living below the poverty line. What is the government's answer to this enormous crisis? Instead of providing sustainable support, they deploy a three-card trick, and it goes something like this. Abjectly fail to adequately increase core payments for those most in need, while pointing at temporary one-off measures as evidence that their interests have been protected. Nobody should be fooled by this cynical approach. Temporary supports are not the answer to a persistent cost of living crisis. They will not provide sustainable relief to those who can no longer afford the extortionate cost of necessities like fuel, like food, energy and rent. The Social Democrats proposed a €25 increase in weekly core social welfare rates because that is what is required to respond to this crisis. Instead, the government increased rates by just €12, less than half of what is needed. This budget was not designed for the most vulnerable, and nowhere is this more clear than on child poverty. The Taoiseach has claimed that eradicating child poverty is a priority of his. Yet one of the worst measures in yesterday's budget was the unconscionable decision to increase the payments that are targeted to the most disadvantaged children by a pathetic €4. The single biggest determining factor as to whether or not you grow up in poverty in Ireland is whether or not you grow up in a one-parent family. 70% of the families made homeless since March are lone parent households. And what have you given them? €4 a week. €4 in a 14 billion budget when addressing child poverty is supposed to be the Taoiseach's special project. In his speech yesterday, the Minister for Public Expenditure announced research funding to, quote, improve understanding of child poverty. We have mountains of research. We know which children are most at risk of poverty and what policy measures actually work. What we need is action, and the government failed to act. Disability services were also shown the cold shoulder, to say the least. The parents of children with disabilities have to fight on their behalf from the moment they're born. They don't get anything they're entitled to without a fight first. The only thing people are guaranteed from the state is waiting lists. Waiting lists for an assessment of need. Waiting lists for therapies. Waiting lists for a school place. No supports, no services, just queues. Despite this huge crisis, the figure in the budget for investment in disability services was 64 million. Honest question to the ministers, is that a typo? Because mere hours after the budget was announced, Minister Abbott was announcing a €195 million package for disability services, but her short list of expenditures left 87 million of that unaccounted for. So what is the number? How much is the government spending on disability? Week after week in this chamber, we raise the crisis facing the disability sector, and every time we get the same rhetoric back from government. Of course you care. Of course you're doing everything you can to improve the life of disabled people, and how dare we even question that? With this budget, I will question that. It's been 10 years since the Fine Gael and Labour government axed the mobility allowance and motorised transport grant. 10 years since the Taoiseach promised disabled drivers a replacement scheme, and still nothing. You had an opportunity to provide the funding to make long-term improvements to disabled people's lives, and you passed. If you're not going to fund the sector now, with such a huge surplus available to you, then I have no faith that you will. The Social Democrats would have put our money where our mouth is. We allocated a total package of €534.1 million for disability services. The Social Democrats would have introduced a €30 weekly cost of disability payment, in addition to the increases in core social welfare rates. We would also have made provision for pay parity for community and voluntary workers who provide so many of these services. And we would have ensured adequate funding for the huge capacity gaps that exist in services. This was all missing from the budget. It seems like you forgot about disability services, and I presume you must have the same excuse for mental health, because the words mental health are used 3 times in the budget. No detail, no funding, no nothing. Do you actually think that that is good enough? This budget had the power to be transformative and to tackle some of the major problems facing the country in areas like housing, healthcare, disability, climate and education. But instead of radical reform, what we got was minimalism, tweaking around the edges from a government that is out of ideas for the future of this country. So I'm still wondering, Minister, who was this budget for? You claim it's for housing, for child poverty and for struggling families, but where is the proof?
Deputy Jennifer.